That's pretty good.
Yeah.
Like every time.
We're doing something really good, so we're change that.
There's a parent meeting going on downstairs.
Yes.
But they don't have food.
Apparently.
I actually think they might have pizza, but.
Do you want to get started?
I guess so.
All right, yeah, we can get started, and then as people come in, they can join. So I'm Lori Coleman, I'm the superintendent. I think I know most people here, so I have the pleasure of being the superintendent in Central Berkshire at an exciting time when we are looking at a long-term solution for Wahconah Regional High School. We are very fortunate to be supported by an excellent team that is working with us to navigate the MSBA process. MSBA is the Mass School Building Authority. They will be partnering with us to finance the project, so they also have requirements that we need to meet. Fortunately, the team we work with from Skanska, who is here tonight, Dale will introduce, is extremely well versed in the MSBA process and is able to successfully lead us being myself, our assistant superintendent Melissa Belkowski, our building principal Aaron Robb, our school building committee, which is chaired by Tom Callahan, the retired principal from Wahconah, and Sean Armacost, our school committee chairperson, as well as several other people who represent throughout the community. They're guiding us through that process, and I think we have the list up here. We do have some members. Gary's here tonight from Peru, Melinda from Hinsdale, Jason from Dalton, and then we have school committee members, Bonnie and Rich as well. So a lot of people supporting and working on this project together. DRA is the design team working with us. Carl will introduce that team and talk about their role and how they're helping us to look at both what the educational needs are of the building and the infrastructure needs. So this tonight is really your opportunity to give us your voice and your ideas around what you see the needs are. And Carl will talk through that process. So thanks for coming, and spread the word if people do want to add their voice and they weren't able to come. School building committee meetings are an option. We meet almost every other week as a small group and then every month as a large group. And feel free to tell people to reach out. Dale or Carl?
Okay.
Dale goes first, then Carl. We should have this down by now.
Again, I'm Dale Caldwell, Skanska, we're here at OPM. So tonight we're in a feasibility study with the MSBA. And just to reiterate what Lori said, the MSBA is your partner in this project. It's your tax dollars coming back. And we'll talk about the process we have to follow this. So right now it's called a feasibility study, schematic design phase, and there's 3 components to it. The first one, which we're in right now, is called a preliminary design program, or PDP. So in the spring of 2018, our goal is to finish this process. The 3 main things: the educational program, how's the school run today, what's it going to look like in the future. Existing condition survey, Carl talked a little bit about that. That's going into the existing high school, and with his engineers, mechanical, electrical, plumbing, fire protection, ADA, you name it, they're all in the building doing a full assessment. And then finally, alternate. So basically the program, and we're required through the MSBA to look at 3 options at a minimum. 1, which I call a status quo, just go in and maintain the building, do a large maintenance project the way it is today. Carl talked a little more about that. The second one is an addition on the building. It could be in the front, beside, the back, and Carl again will kind of go through that, and we have to look at a brand new option. So they require us to look at those 3 options for this program. So when that's done, we go into what's called PSR phase. Again, this is the fall of this year, 2018. Again, the educational plan, we take the educational plan, incorporate it into the design, whatever that design is. We don't know. Like I just said previously in the other meeting, probably more questions than we have answers, but we're going to come back here again. So we'll have more information, then you'll be able to catch up on where we're at. Evaluation alternatives. Again, this is the different options within the job site. So Carl will show you some different thoughts, very, very preliminary, about 30,000 feet looking down. And the goal is to come with 1 preferred option. So in the fall of this year, we have to go to the Mass School Building Authority with 1 option. So we kind of go from, say, 5 to 8 options, we narrow them down to 1. Then we go into what's called a schematic design phase. So in the winter of this year, again, this SD phase, we have that 1 option. We get into the scope, the budget, and the schedule. And this is where we start looking at what's it going to cost, how we're going to build it, eligible costs, ineligible. We're going to break it down by the different towns so you can see exactly what the cost is. And then what happens, we go to the MSBA board meeting in April of 2019. So basically, this is the approval for the project. After that date, we have the 1 project. You have 120 days to approve it locally. And that brings us to the spring of 2019. So again, this is the process we go through in the front end of this. So from now all the way to the spring of 2019. So Carl's going to kind of walk through process.
We'll kind of elaborate on that first phase of the preliminary design program. Again, I'm Carl Franceschi with DRA. With me tonight, Paul Moore is an architect and educational programmer with us, and Vladimir Lubetsky, project manager. And just a little background, DRAs, we specialize in focus on educational facilities. We've done a lot of projects. A lot of these you can see are high schools just in the last 14 years or so, and a couple of local ones you may be familiar with. Over in Springfield, we did the New Putnam Technical Academy, and in Pittsfield, this is the rendering of the Taconic project. It's soon going to look like that in real. It's ready to be occupied in a couple months. And we work with Skanska on that project as well. Some of the key issues that we see in the project that we don't want to lose sight of, but we also want your feedback on in case you think there are some other things that are important. But certainly the first big decision is, going to be undertaken in this next couple weeks and months. Should it be a new school or renovated and or expanded existing school? That's always a big question, and particularly here. We want to make sure that we get a lot of feedback and get as much information on the existing building, the existing program as we can to help inform that choice. We want to make sure that the building supports the learning, and particularly at Wahconah, the district has already kind of taken steps forward educationally, but the building is kind of holding them back right now. It doesn't have the spaces or the adjacencies and the configuration that support 21st century learning. And then a couple of challenges really, as you might know, obviously in the Berkshires. Population's declining, school enrollment's declining slightly as we look out 10 or 15 years. And obviously a school project of this kind, whether it's new or renovated, has to last another 50 years or so. So we do have to take the long view there, and there are a few challenges, and it kind of forces us to be creative and try to get multiple use out of spaces, for instance, as best we can, and still offer the the rich curriculum and course choices that exist now, but try and do it in a slightly smaller high school. The district and the state have already agreed that the target enrollment, or the design enrollment we should say, is 460 students. That's a little bit lower than today's enrollment at Wahconah, which is 540 or so. But that's where it's projected to be, and that's kind of where we need to design. So there'll be some challenges, as I say, especially early on, if the enrollment is still up around 500 when we first move into the school. And then issues of safety and security around doing construction next to occupancy or phasing of a renovation project is always important criteria when we look at options, trying to weigh the pluses and minuses. Some renovation projects in high schools can take 3 or 4 years if they're done in small increments, and 4 years is one student's entire high school experience, and so we want to make sure we keep that in mind, and of course we want to involve the community as we're doing tonight. So that this first step, the preliminary design program, has these 7 little parts to it that will be completed in the next month or so as we wrap things up. But the ones we want to focus on, the most important parts of this project, are developing the educational program, which the district already has well in hand. We add to that a space summary, and I'll share with you that form. But that's basically the educational side of things. It doesn't talk about the design as yet, really. And the evaluation of existing conditions, again, very important in helping us decide how much is it going to cost to renovate the building or fix what's broken, and what are those deficiencies right now. And then developing alternatives. We're not narrowing the list of alternatives right now. We're expanding it to be as broad as possible. As Dale said, there's a minimum, but that's really the wide spectrum, all the way from, in essence, doing nothing educationally, just fixing the facility, to replacing it with an all-new school. Well, in between, there's about 5 or 8 or 10 other possibilities there. So we want to develop the full expanse of those alternatives in this phase right now. And what that educational plan addresses are all these aspects of school. And it's a pretty exhaustive list. The MSBA wants to make sure that we think about all these things before moving ahead. And particularly what they're looking for is they want to understand what's happening today, what's the existing, and what's the proposed in each of those areas of that long list. And you want to make sure it's done collaboratively. That's not just the educators or the administrators going off by themselves and coming up with the future vision for Wahconah. And this is part of that collaboration, as was the some earlier sessions that I'll share with you. And it's kind of a narrative description of what the future wants to be. It's not an architectural design yet at all in the educational plan, though it does have some diagrams that go with it. So this was one of the ways of getting a diverse collaborative input in the process here. Some familiar faces in the photo here, but we had about 40 people over a couple days, full day sessions doing visioning with the aid of our educational consultant Frank Blocker as a facilitator. We shared what's happening currently in education, what are some options out there, and we broke into small groups at various times around these tables to collaborate and build consensus on a few key aspects of the plan. And we also did some programming that sort of goes hand in hand with visioning, where we sat down with individual departments or key curriculum coordinators for each subject area or aspect of the school to get their perspective on what's happening today, what's good, what's bad, what's needed in the future. So, and it's not the last time we'll talk to them either. We'll be back in touch with them as we move forward in the process too. And as Dale said, it's really a process that starts sort of broadly, looking at a lot of options that come out of the education plan, narrowing it down to a single option. That's really the goal of this first, this feasibility phase of the project. So some of the things to share with you that came out of visioning, we focused on some educational issues, and these were the four concepts that rose to the top that we want to incorporate in the education plan, which is being done right now. Make sure that the building and the curriculum really engages students. That was very important and emphasized. That we continue to expand upon integrating the notion of 21st century skills into the curriculum. These are things about communication and collaboration, creativity, and critical thinking skills. And that sort of goes hand in hand too with STEM and STEAM, the acronym for science, technology, engineering, and math. That those are important aspects for training, future graduates for jobs that we don't even know exist yet. And they may change over time so quickly with technology and all that. We want graduates who can be lifelong learners and have the skills, acquire those skills in high school to make them successful later on. And another aspect of learning, project-based learning, as opposed to just sort of lecturing or maybe more traditional problem solving or problem sets or essay writing. That project-based learning can integrate some of these other concepts into the curriculum. We also thought about facilities issues in the visioning sessions. We looked at some 21st century schools and we picked out from a list of 10 or 12 some of the more successful ones and are incorporating that into the educational plan. We realized that flexible furniture goes a long way to making a flexible school, and we don't want to lose sight of that. Clearly, safety and security is a prime concept that as best we can from a facilities point of view address. And then this notion about teacher planning centers, which is might seem like a kind of fine detail or small detail in the big picture of things, but really it represents kind of a different approach that teachers no longer will own a classroom necessarily, even though they may teach in one space for a majority of the time. They don't necessarily own that classroom. So when they have a free period, they have a teacher planning center to go to nearby, and hopefully it's equipped professionally and adequate in terms of resources and computers and privacy and so forth. So that becomes an area for teachers to collaborate or to meet with students and perhaps meet with others, not just other English teachers, if you're an English teacher, for instance, that sort of thing. That it actually, by just that small move of having those and getting teachers out of their room, it starts to bring about some of these other concepts that we want to encourage. And then there was a focus too on learning styles or modalities as to what were the most effective and least effective. There was certainly consensus that lecturing was the least effective way, and Wahconah already is addressing that. They sort of minimize how much time a teacher spends lecturing to students in each class period and more on some of these other aspects. Project-based learning, again, small group, collaboration, kids working together. It's okay to copy the next, to work. It's no longer, the working by yourself all the time. And that social emotional learning is an important aspect of high school too. It's not just acquiring information. That's pretty easy nowadays to acquire information, but that's not necessarily education in and of itself. And then we use this tool as a map to say, again, kind of that aspect of where are we today on a scale of more traditional to more progressive or future looking, and where do we want to be. Educationally, Wahconah is a little bit more than just traditional. As we said, it's already integrating some 21st century learning skills and teaching methodologies. From a facilities point of view, unfortunately, it's still very traditional. If you look at the floor plan, it hasn't changed almost since the year it opened. It's still double-loaded quarters and classrooms more or less all the same size, and departments of the tech eds on one side of the building. The classrooms are organized departmentally. Those sorts of things haven't really changed. But where we agreed that it wants to be is at this end of the spectrum, much more transformed or progressive. And then we did, as I say, include a few diagrams of how some of these concepts might translate into buildings. And so this is kind of the start of physical planning, of thinking about the school. A couple things to notice here. One is the academic side. These little bubbles represent learning spaces. You can call them classrooms. Notice that they're not all organized the traditional way along a corridor, but they're organized in clusters. And they're also of varying sizes and varying subject matters. There's science, and there's sort of a science integrated into each cluster, not all the science rooms grouped together. There's also, as we said, it's important to have a teacher planning center adjacent to these clusters. And also some open space, some breakout space or cluster or collaborative space to support both the project-based learning and the collaborative skills and so forth. And that each of the clusters are grouped around a learning commons, a library, which would not look like this space necessarily. There wouldn't be as many books. The library becomes more of a resource and a shared resource by the classrooms. That's why we want to have that close proximity. And it would have other aspects to it, some closed group rooms, some larger group rooms, some access to makerspace and those kinds of resources perhaps to support project-based learning. Maybe even the tech ed kinds of spaces are more accessible to the classroom spaces and not off in a wing by themselves. And then the other takeaway from this diagram is notice that the bulk of the academic spaces are here, and then the larger public spaces are here, so that they're more easily separated for both security and sort of functionality. So the gym, the auditorium, cafeteria are accessible to the public and could be closed off from the rest of the school for those times when nights and weekends when it's used, that sort of thing. So we've taken to refine those diagrams a little bit more, and we'll be incorporating these in the Ed Plan 2 to show what those classroom clusters might look like. Here's a starting of a diagram where there's certain size classrooms, larger ones, smaller ones, a science lab, some open space, as we said, a teacher planning space, organized more, not linearly, but more clustered is an important takeaway here. And if we sort of expand that now and say, how do we organize the clusters again around the learning commons? Where does art happen? Where does tech ed happen? This is the start of a sort of conceptual planning for the school that reinforces the concepts that came out of visioning. And again, you can see the separation of the larger spaces grouped around the student commons cafeteria from the academic side of the building. But there's still good control in the sense that there'd be a main entrance adjacent to administration with sort of a control aspect to it where the rest of the doors on the school perhaps could be locked, all visitors directed here and monitored and so forth to to address security. And then here's that space summary form I made reference to that is also part of educational planning, where we need to utilize the state form. We list every space in the building. The first column here is what the number and size of those spaces. The middle section is about what's proposed for those areas. They don't necessarily have to match up necessarily. We may have different kinds of classrooms that don't even exist today and so forth. But we use this form at least as a way to compile it all in one place. And then the right-hand column is the state guidelines for those kinds of spaces. And again, the state tries not to be too prescriptive about, what a high school should be. That's the local, district's call, really. But they do need to monitor the overall size and therefore cost of buildings too. So these are kind of guidelines that they do measure what's proposed against. And in certain aspects, like one that many people are familiar with, the auditorium, for instance, the state has a guideline on how large an auditorium they will support with their dollars. They won't prevent you from building something larger, but they won't necessarily reimburse it the same way they would reimburse the basic size that they have in their template. That applies to a few other areas of this program. So the next aspect that we mentioned is part of this first phase is evaluating existing conditions. And these are some of the things that we're looking at with our team of architects and engineers going through the existing building. MEP stands for mechanical, electrical, plumbing systems in the building. As we mentioned, we're looking outside the building too, at the site, the fields and the parking areas and so forth, as well as the building itself. We look at accessibility, we look at some fixed equipment as well. And those are all sort of facilities issues, you might say, kind of nuts and bolts of the building. But we also look programmatically at the school as to, how large are the spaces, how are they configured, how are they arranged, how well does that meet today's standards as well. So here are some things that I think a lot of you are familiar with the existing building. Not too many surprises that we find. I think people understand that a lot of materials are at or near the end of their life. There's still modulars being used that are beyond their useful life there as well, don't really offer permanent value. There are accessibility issues in various parts of the school that would have to be addressed to bring it up to standards as well. Some hazardous materials that not necessarily exposed today, but in a renovation project would need to be addressed and removed or abated from the building. And then, the summary kind of is that the school has been well maintained and all, but still so many systems and materials are beyond their useful life that it's getting expensive and difficult to maintain as we go forward. And here's the sort of one tool that we use for programmatically evaluating the existing building, where we take the floor plan of the building, look at the spaces and compare them against either state standards or best practices. And we kind of score them like a traffic light, red, yellow, and green, where red is where it doesn't meet the standard, it's well below it. Yellow is kind of marginal, and green is okay in terms of size, at least. We also, will look at adjacencies and some other aspects as well. But you can see there's a fair number of red spaces in the school, and things that don't quite meet best practices right now. Here's a brief summary of some of the programmatic issues that, there are no real collaborative spaces in the school right now. They're just classrooms and corridors. And people try to use the corridors even now. Some teaching and learning is going on in there. It's obviously not designed for that right now, but it could be in a renovation perhaps if we do a few strategic moves. A lot of spaces, as we said, are too small. It's still organized departmentally, which doesn't really match their long-term goals. There's a couple spaces missing, like auxiliary PE spaces like fitness or weight room. Nurse and guidance lack privacy. That's really not appropriate either. Lack of meeting space for some of the administration too. So those are the kinds of comments that will go into our report about existing conditions that will be part of the preliminary design program. And then the third aspect, the important part of this phase is starting to develop that broad range of alternatives. So starting with new construction here in this diagram is we're looking for locations on the existing site where you could fit a new school. And this is just a very conceptual diagram. You can see the size of the existing building doesn't exactly match up with the size of these rectangles, but it just gives us some diagrammatic locations that we'll be investigating. We're already underway in doing this, but the idea being in a strategy is to site the new school in such a way that we minimally affect the existing teaching and learning in the existing building. So we want to find a location that's outside the footprint of the existing building, obviously, but also try to minimize disruption to things like parking or fields or access to the school, buses, deliveries, things like that too. Will be evaluated as we develop each of these options. Here's what, the options at this stage are going to be this kind of diagrammatic, really. Here's one that, very preliminarily we looked at in front of the existing school, near the existing road, where there might be, gym and auditorium at one end, classrooms at the other side, cafeteria in the middle. These are organized more in clusters. And then after the school is removed, you can build new fields. So we would, think it through and think about phasing and impact on the existing and so forth for each option. In renovation options, the gray is the existing school. We might show an addition at one end that could possibly be, say, new science labs, which were one of those spaces that were kind of woefully undersized right now. And the rest of the school gets renovated somehow internally. We reconfigure. We're not showing it in this diagram, but we may strategically remove some classrooms and create some cluster spaces, things like that within the existing envelope. We may do some partial demolition and new construction. So there's a whole host of options you can envision in that regard. And an option that was touched upon very early on: what if we save just the gym and auditorium and build new academic areas? It's kind of like Mount Greylock is doing with their high school. So these were very preliminary. We're working on them right now. Our next major step would be to develop these and start to evaluate them. And the tool that we use to evaluate them is this kind of a matrix where we list all the options from just doing the repairs, fixing what's broken without changing anything educationally, down to new construction options. And there may be more than 7 or 8 of them. There may be 10 or 12 by the time we're done. And some of them may fall off pretty quick. We won't take them very, very far because we may be able to, on a preliminary basis, say, well, it doesn't really meet the educational goals. Let's, eliminate that one. If we can't meet that very basic threshold, why proceed, with some of these options? There might be other goals and other criteria that we want to list. We want to hear from you in that regard. We also want to think about disruption, phasing. How is any of these solutions implemented? And then cost. This would be the first time we start thinking about cost, but it's really an order of magnitude kind of number. It's not a specific cost because the plans aren't very specific at this point in time yet, and it would be expressed in a range, usually a pretty healthy range, of 15 to 20% up or down or something like that. But it gives us an order of magnitude so we can compare one against the other. It is important. And there may be some other criteria that are important too. Here's a listing that we've seen from other projects. We'd like your feedback on what you think are the important criteria. That's one of the things that we want to accomplish tonight. We've heard from other communities. And maybe some other things that aren't on this list that we should have on the list. But one of the things I want to mention too, typically people say cost is the most important, and if we come up with 3 or 4 solutions that all meet the educational goals, we should go with the lowest cost one. Well, it's not quite that easy sometimes to think of it that way. You do want to think about cost in a couple different ways. The reimbursement cost may vary with some of the solutions. With certain things, when you invest money in temporary facilities, like to do a renovation, if you have to have modular classrooms in order to free up some space, that the cost of those modulars, renting them for a year or 2, is not reimbursable. So it does affect the equation of what the cost to the district is ultimately. It may still be in the total project cost, but the cost to the district may vary. And operating and maintenance costs. Again, if you think about long-term value, yes, we may be able to satisfy the educational program, but what about the long-term value in one solution versus another. It's an important concept to keep in mind. Certainly disruption, as we mentioned, might be very different for one solution versus another. Even though we like the end product, the getting there may be painful. That's often a criteria. But certainly, how well it meets the educational goals or how appropriate it is has to be near the top of any list, we would think. So that's kind of leading into then the next phase of tonight, which we'd like to do is just go from my lecturing at you to small group discussions where we can record. We've got some pads of paper. We've done this at each community meeting where we can hear from you, the community members, and including building committee members, what's most important as we think about those alternatives in the next phase. What do you think are the challenges that we're facing in this project? Because you've lived here a lot longer than we have, we recognize that. We want to get the value of your experiences. And also, now's the time, the one time maybe, where you have blue sky, tells the dreams. If you look at that board over there, we peeled off the ones from the other communities. There was some, I think we had a swimming pool and a hockey rink and what was it?
Planetarium.
Planetarium, air conditioning, everything. So now's the time if you have some blue sky thoughts as to what we should be including in the project to let us know that too. So I know we don't have that big a group. Probably we can just do 2 tables here, just in opposite diagonal corners of the room here. If we can just gather around those tables, we'll have a few people to, at least one person to record at each and get some feedback. So when we split up, there's also some food here. You can maybe take a break and grab some food or drink and then pick a table.
Yes, thanks.
Good. One break, spring game. Retired. Yeah, down for that. Is the spring going good?
I've told you.
You got hurt. Yeah, I get through it.
You got the whole line right there.
Oh, really?
Yes.
4, 50 years.
Your home.
That was,
Put it up. Then the whole year in water. I think that we get some more.
I'll be around.
You never know when someone's gonna get hurt.
What's your daughter, she at school?
Spent spring break this weekend.
Nice.
Yeah. Dinner?
You're gonna come back? You can be the recorder here. Tom and Sean, yeah, you can drive. Sorry, I don't know your name. Hey, Ken.
And I am also the
Are you a resident in Hinsdale? Oh, okay. You grew up here. Okay. So I don't want to say you had to be here, but it's nice that you're here. Whatever happened. What do you think of the big challenges? Yeah.
But I write.
We just want to have kind of a record of the topics we covered, so we can share with other people.
Trust guys like Tom and Sean, you mean, the leaders of the
Shorter ride, right?
Make dinner. See you later.
Right.
Everything.
Yeah.
burning issue. I think should be included.
It'll be very massive until our price comes out.
I'll try to talk to it.
Is that right?
Become aggressive.
We can put a floater number out there then, if that's what we need to do to get.
I was almost thinking when I emailed you about the number that was up
Yeah,
there.
yeah.
That it'd be good to start like something like that and.
Oh, come down.
The red.
Yeah, well,
That's another strategy.
we don't, we can touch on that tonight, but really, it is important to understand, this phase of the project, the whole thing through schematic design, is to establish a budget. It's not like we have a magic number that we're gonna work backwards. What's the best high school we can build for $40 million or something? That's not how it works. We wanna build what's appropriate and then figure out how much it costs. And generally, because this is our one time to establish the cost and agreement with the MSBA, we can only come down. Because once that, at the end of this schematic design, we have an agreement with the state, that's the contract, and that's their reimbursement is fixed. And we can't go above that. So it generally does, we try to be conservative in the sense of making sure we've got in everything that we need or want, and that we're a little conservative maybe in estimating what escalation is going to do to the cost, because it's going to take a year or two to build it beyond that point, and so forth. So generally it does come down a little bit from the first numbers that are floated out there. So
To that point, I'd like to add something, and that is, we can anticipate that there's going to be costs that are not going to be reimbursable. Like,
definitely.
I believe we're going to want to do
I don't really know what that would relate to.
some of the blue sky
You know, how much,
things,
what
the
percentage
planetarium
of
is
energy?
It's going to be something generally accepted by the community.
They have these indoor plants there. It's not a big part of it.
Okay.
You can actually project like on the ceiling and you inflate, not inflate, but those pop-up tents with the poles, it's like that,
Sure. Okay, well,
It can be done, but,
that's feasible.
yeah. But there's definitely gonna be ineligible costs.
But it'd be nice to know what kind of the threshold is the community would, what would be the tipping point in terms of what would push them over the edge that, no, that's way too much for coming right out of our pocket to, how much do we want to support the whole community?
It might be expressed best, not as like an absolute number, but maybe they should understand what the options are. In other words, here's what, the absolute minimum we need is, we think, and these are some of the things, we think have long-term value, but may not be eligible for reimbursement and are driving up the cost slightly. We can identify those kinds of things. Right. Like certainly, we've heard, in these previous meetings about energy efficiency, for instance. There's definitely some pluses and minuses there. We can invest in a very efficient HVAC system for great energy efficiency. Might cost a little bit more upfront, but it saves you, over the life cycle of the equipment. And particularly if you think about it, at least the first cost is being shared with the state somewhat. The operating savings is all yours in the future. So that, if you do the math that way, it makes good sense to invest in energy efficient systems, even at a slight premium.
One of the things we're doing at the Conic is their AP environmental studies class is
Even though we don't always get parents in, we're
we're
trying
teaching some
hard
of
to
the classes
give
about
them
how we're
a
doing
vision of
energy
what's happening in
efficiency.
schools now, and show them that it's different. That teaching and learning is not like it was.
Rather than
When I went to high school, when they went to high school.
stupid
So educating
test
them about why
curriculum,
these
so
actions
they
are
can't send
important
what's time is.
to the benefit of the children.
We can certainly do that in this project.
No, that's certainly a common refrain you hear a lot, is, well, school's good enough when I went there, why do they have to change it?
So when you
Yeah,
think
yeah.
they're paying attention and they see it's
We're also doing,
but really being transparent
Start
about
counting it up.
how.
Am I being like in video?
You're just slightly, if you go on this side.
that changes education.
By some of the
Goes in my
comments
pocket.
we've got so far, I think it's starting to come up with different occupations. People are starting to realize that they don't know what's out there. Even in their generation, the current parents, and the job change factor, these things that are being mentioned, I'm surprised at how positive they're being received as people adjust their recommendations to what we're talking about, 21st century tactics and so on. That's pleasing as opposed to what, frankly, I was expecting more, at least at this point. Oh no, brick and mortar, square building, is it? That'll work. So I think that's progress toward accepting 21st century building, hopefully, and maybe it'll give a little more.
Lots of support from our elementary PTO, and I can't speak to the middle school PTO, but I know at each of our schools, the PTOs are supporting both financially and just in support for the initiatives and the schools. So these are the people who are going to be contributing that kind of thing.
Maybe another time, as a building committee, we've gone to other schools and seen what they're doing. But as community members, they may only know Dalton schools. They don't know about Divinity, they don't know about Lunenburg or Maynard or any of the other schools and the way they're teaching. And to educate them on how they're all doing elsewhere. Maybe a good way of coming at. This is our options that we can emulate what other people are doing.
Maintenance was a big factor in the previous meeting. A couple of fellows. We were talking about incorporating more under IA tech by using the building's assets. And in regard to the, you and I were kind of on by the maintenance facilities in a couple of these buildings, that got a lot of attention from these contributors at the previous meeting. And so they talked about curriculum. That was another plus toward listening to us, I think, and supporting us. This may be a little off track. What if we did our next session like this at the PTO meetings? Would that be well received? Or?
It would be well received, but you'll still hit a very small group of people. I can only speak for Kittredge, but there's maybe 5.
They were demonstrating some of the schools.
But you'd still reach 5 people. They were the ones that were here
Renovation
when they presented
that
initially.
small
Karen and
academy,
Sean
what they
came.
did was
I think they're
focus
also
the
people
education
who are
around the
probably on
local
board.
business.
Yeah.
So there was a lot of
Can you go to Ozzy's?
bio firms and agriculture.
And do a presentation?
So they actually had a academy around
What's that?
bio.
It's a local restaurant.
Oh.
And that's what they focused on in that education
Well,
academy.
yeah, there's-
And I brought it up.
There's
in
a
that
difference
section.
between,
You know, we could do
this phase of the project where we're still kind of like,
obviously,
we're somewhat informing people, but also gathering input versus once we've kind of identified the project and now we're selling it, you know, before the vote. Yeah, certainly at that second point, second phase, you definitely want to go to all these different venues, senior centers and restaurants,
a lot of metalworking that,
and there may only be 3 people there.
academies around
But
those would be
what we usually help is, you know, we develop a presentation that the building committee members are comfortable with and can do on their own, so that you can have 20 people, you know, spread out and cover the countryside and all these different
whatever we do.
Boy Scout meetings or PTO meetings or whatever it might be, just take a quick, you know, 20-minute presentation to be available to answer
It
questions.
isn't
Can we
the way
collect
education
some
works now,
really
and
key,
that's something that
several
is very stark.
key questions
You know,
that we could put up
We have to
in a
fix that
newsletter?
and make sure that the building and whatever the education plan is
You know,
supports.
the same kinds of questions you're asking
Yeah,
here
yeah.
tonight, but
Sounds
really
like a
explicit.
cliche. But after the education I've gotten,
Feedback
it's not a
on
cliche. It's the
Yeah, I think, and if your elementary school PTOs are active, those are really the families whose kids are going to benefit from this
As you know,
the most. It's not, unfortunately, the current high school parents,
Kids, check out.
because their kids will be
You know, we teach
graduated by the
content,
time
be
it really
lifelong learners. We
opens,
need to teach them
whatever
to
it
be
is.
lifelong learners.
Yeah.
And that's where the student engagement.
I just think it's hard
is.
to get them to
Number
come out
one
sometimes.
on our list in that vision
Get it to
plan
them,
was
even
because we teach kids not to like school.
Question, yeah. On a Google search like form,
Yeah.
right in the newsletters you guys send out, like the 4, send the same one. I mean, Aaron could as well, but really, but
They need, a lot of
it's a good idea.
and skilled laborers need
we do get good response to that kind of thing. We did a survey in the beginning, we got
There's
good
a lot of
response.
people that don't out of Berkshire because there aren't the jobs, there isn't the.
That's useful.
The income capacity, you know, so it's not, I don't see it as just one versus.
What else, in terms of
It should kind of be
evaluating
broader.
different options, once we develop them,
Broader
some
community and the regional.
new ones, some
You know, I don't-
renovation ones where we stay within the four walls, we're gonna have some that are, you know, tear down half the building.
We do have relationships with some
So
of the
if you can
businesses.
envision those,
I was,
you know, host
I was
of what
debating
might
whether
seem
I'd
very
say it,
different
I'll say it
options,
blunt about it.
we'd like to
A lot of the
have
employers,
objective criteria to use to evaluate them, so
a lot of
it
the employers
doesn't become
that,
too, you know, emotional or,
spoken to
you know,
me,
subjective way of
honestly, they
evaluating.
need people that will show up on
Certainly
time.
cost is important, we understand that.
Really, and I'm actually not.
Is there a way
You know,
to
talk
right
about
now, some other
our
criteria
electricians
that
and our
you think
plumbers
is
and so on and
particularly,
so forth. And I think that,
you know, important to the district?
we talk about what we're teaching.
Will
it's
people
not just,
appreciate, for instance,
you
how
know, skills
well
or trades and sort of those sorts of things, but there's other
the solution
aspects
addresses the
of
educational
life that schools
goals,
are now having to
as
teach that we
important.
usually just defer to parents.
even if it costs a few dollars.
Not only that, but I think
if
even
we
just how to
demonstrate that it's not a fixed structure.
I don't know how else to describe it. And, you know, whether cell phone doesn't do it or whatever, I mean, but,
Your spaces.
so the term social emotional learning. is
That's
the
just
thing
flexibility.
that I think about.
That's an important concept too, that came out of the meeting. I don't think I put the word up there, but it was in the report. It's one of
It
the
all comes back to the
top
fact that
notions,
you have to know how to
both
be
the
people
curriculum
first.
sort of, but
It's harder to
the
teach
building
kids
itself
to
needs to
that,
be flexible.
when you've
Yeah.
got more things working against you, so.
And different
That's where
designs may
a lot
address
of the
that
talk
differently
vision
too.
sections start to
So
pop up
it does
about,
become a criteria that
you know, learning
separates one from
and
another.
that sort of thing. And
I think
making
also
learning feel a little bit more
talking about in terms of the
personal,
building itself as a whole.
relevant.
A lot of the comments I get back from like the sports groups is when they come out to visit
But in
Wahconah,
in all honesty,
they love the grounds
any
and how
employers
it's
that I've
open
talked
and
to,
appealing, you know, it's not.
literally,
You know,
those are
the
the
sports
things-
building,
that's the
that's
number one
kind of
feedback I get.
If we could capitalize on.
You just teach them to show up on time and stay committed, swear to God.
Like the
And
first
they're
one,
not-
the first
they're
round
not
are showing,
joking around.
where the buildings built off the side, they're like taking over the.
Yeah, I piece of that is.
But that left a bigger open area in the back. where
Yeah.
You do a bigger selection of soccer fields or lacrosse fields, things like that. To capitalize on the space we do that. Instead of trying to shoehorn it into some spot to make the construction a little bit easier.
Yeah, if you think about it, there's this, you know, the way the building, I'm just trying to.
There is another problem too.
The way the building's positioned now, it's a little bit far set back from the road. You know, when we first saw it, we thought there was a septic field here or something. Because you see that sometimes, and that's why it's. So in that sense, you know, the green space kind of flows around it. Whereas if it were closer to the road, like you said, then you'd have a bigger block of green space here that's a little more flexible in and of itself. You know, because sometimes, yeah, baseball field is, you know, obviously has a fixed thing and the track is kind of fixed. But sometimes you see soccer fields, for a few years they're laid out this way, then they rotate them to, you know, minimize the wear
We
and
don't carry that
tear.
flexibility here.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
So for me to shut down the varsity
Go off to college
soccer
and they're
field,
not
you know, we're
coming
really
back.
putting another
There are
sport
some
in.
good jobs.
Exactly.
We need to do that rotation into the
Right.
sports fields.
So from a master planning point of view, it's sometimes more efficient to have the building and parking kind of more compact and on one side and have the green space be a block of green space. That
How
is,
we
you know,
incorporate that into
a good point
what
is
we're trying to
that,
do here.
you know,
I'm
and
not
it could be
sure,
over
but I
here,
just think it's
that
something
the
that we
building
have to
and
have
parking
back
were
in our
here,
minds is
then
that,
you have a big
you know,
block
we
of green
have,
space
a
that's more
projection of,
flexible.
you know,
Yeah.
I think also what we do is,
The economic
It is
projections,
a
the population
two-story,
projections
three-story
are all
building. We'll have an
down.
opportunity.
And we don't want
Across
to
the
see
street is
that
the golf
happen. We
course,
need to be
Yeah.
working
which
to
has great views.
improve our economy
You know,
and
a lot of
attract
great
people
trees
here.
involved.
So how do we do that? And
They could take
education is
advantage of
a big
the
part
views.
Speaking of the
Yeah.
internships.
Instead of looking at the side,
It comes back
hill,
to.
Yeah.
you know,
to the left side of the
outreach to
picture.
businesses
Yeah.
that you
Yeah.
were
because
talking
then you're just
about.
looking at trees.
Um,
The trees are
yeah.
invisible.
You don't have a long.
Really close
Right,
to
you
the
don't have a
building
long.
to try to use it as.
Well, the other thing too, this is upside down, but you know, north is this way here. And we generally try to orient schools, if we can, if they're somewhat linearly, in this direction, so that the majority of windows are north and south. And better from both
a
the
lot of the
energy
kids
point of view, but
are
more about
getting
natural light. It's easier to
primary
control
service
north and
industry,
south
I would
light.
say.
It's
You know,
hard to control,
primary
especially
industry.
west.
Yeah,
You know, east
hospitality,
is,
restaurant.
you know, the sun isn't quite as hot. But in the afternoon, if you've got west-facing windows, you end up closing the shades, you know, and then nobody's got a view because you're trying to keep the light out. And, you know, and all these classrooms here are facing west.
And that's a big problem, because the sun goes from the left baseball field around the back.
Feels like, yeah, the baseball field is kind of upside down too, really. It should, you know.
Carl, the other interesting note there is that you've got nitrous in the picture. If
Yeah.
you filter out the pavement and around it, you can almost see that that footprint would be what a future footprint for the high school would be, maybe a little bit bigger.
Yeah.
And you could also envision the very front end of Wahconah there, you can take off A and B for the back end.
Is there
That's a
No,
big
well, there's no bus ride at all, the
Yeah,
students
yeah.
transport themselves. So that's part of the
So,
activity.
you know, looking at,
We
when
have
trying to
about
get, that's a huge
15
footprint.
students taking
Yeah.
part.
And going two-story,
I'd love to see that number go up.
Yeah, more compact.
it helps open up more space.
You know, for some
You could probably
students,
address some of the
certain
parking
part
that
of high
way,
school,
not lose your
and
fields, you're gonna.
they
gain the
really
field
start
there,
actually thinking about the
where you
world
put
work
it.
more than anything else.
Other times when this is
So
full,
that's
this parking
natural
lot,
progression.
is it just for football games or is it for
Going to college,
events indoors
For
too?
many.
Yeah, graduation, yeah, that one time of year, but,
I do wonder
Yeah.
how this
Find the sky.
school building
Yeah.
categories a way to harness some of
All the
that.
statements about the fields and switching them are all very practical, and I would advocate for opening up as much as you can as possible, because Jason's right, I've always received comments, people coming to play, even at night, by the way, so I would say, given that field preparation, the only field you practically can't move is the football field. Now, I'm not saying that from my experience on the football field, but given the advantages that you cited,
Yeah, we do,
fields to,
you don't have any
First of
lights
all,
here now, right? There's no lights.
kids
Football
are
is
playing
nice,
college,
soccer
we
is
go out of
nice.
our way.
Oh, is that right? Yeah.
I'm getting at the surface stuff.
Permanent lights?
We don't want them to stop.
Oh, okay, okay, so you play some Friday night football games?
Everyone should not go to college.
Yeah.
Okay.
Coach that field.
There's, you know, the notion of college
Yeah.
and career readiness.
And the management of the field
Top
is
set career readiness.
Yeah.
That's fine, this guy's.
That being said, we do.
He's against turf, I understand.
Let's take a vote right now. Lori, what do you think?
You're thinking outside space, you're thinking outside space too is,
Assisting
the
our-
bathrooms always seem to be an issue.
So
Yeah.
Access, indoor, outdoor bathrooms,
So
and
we've been able to.
being able to use that in somehow, some way for all our events. We're happy.
Could you include like a concession stand? Would that be feasible?
It's one of those things that's not reimbursable, but certainly you can include
I mean, if
it
we did like a concession stand with
with some
attached
toilets.
bathrooms.
Yeah.
The thing you get into is
Security as well for the group.
the plumbers union is pretty strong in this state, and they require the number of toilet fixtures for an outdoor assembly space, the same as it would be like for a school. Even though people are here just for, you know, a couple hours for a football game, you end up with this huge requirement for the number of toilets when you start to build them. So we've been successful in a couple projects just to cut it in half, to go to the state for a variance and cut it in half. And it's still, it's like one of these, you know, it's Fenway Park. You go in and there are, you know, 10 stalls there or something. Yeah, but anyways, it's certainly something you can consider, to have a concession stand, you know, centrally located that could serve events.
Could you divide that for day usage versus night usage?
Compete applications.
We're not going to, that was.
No, none of it would be eligible for reimbursement. It's not the fact that it's for community use, it's just the fact that it's kind of,
What if you have constructed in such a way that
Doesn't have to be a voting
for daytime,
but
you know,
if you put
one half of it's off
maker
limits?
spaces and that type
Maybe
of
this is making
conference
sense,
meetings
yeah.
with
And the other
We're
half
actually
would be
teaching
for
vacations
schools.
without having a vocation.
and actually be part of the building.
And nighttime
Small
goes off
labs
the
or
half
whatever.
point into the building.
But I think it's
Yeah.
a
And
huge
open up the whole
opportunity.
area.
Yeah, what you could do that, Sean. Sometimes if the school is a long ways from the field though, sometimes it's not being practical. 10 with,
That's the only option they have now.
yeah. Although you put porta potties
Is that
out,
what you
don't
know? It's what you do with what you know.
Yeah.
And that's what you gotta be.
That's
in
usual,
school.
but yes, if the school can be strategically located in such a way that they can be connected to the school, yes, you can get double use out of them that way. And we've had them enter from the outside and enter from the inside, and you just lock the inside doors so they can't get into the school. Yeah. Yep.
What if there's a portion of the building, let's say it's,
You know, you start talking to them about.
We're tearing down the
best and
what if there's a portion of the building that's safe?
I can tell you 100%.
Reweather type, and turn that into a concession. Instead of building,
I think that.
Again, I think we'd have to be very lucky that it fell into the right location to make sense. But yeah, there's things you can save, but in the end, sometimes in the big picture,
we can incorporate that sort of learning experience.
you know, the contractors will tell you it's just as quick and easy to build something new in the right place, in the right way, than to try to salvage and rework something existing.
But important to mention that
They're the ones that don't
in the
necessarily
beginning,
need to
they
be
did have a
They will
concession
still
stand
learn
in
a
the
lot
garage.
more by
You know,
being
the school
involved
opened
in
and
that.
people
hands-on.
found
Yeah,
out
right here.
from the field to
There were
the
just a
garage.
couple toilets right here, yeah.
The concession too was.
And now I'm
Yeah.
thinking about what we do.
Oh, yeah,
at the
yeah,
CRA.
yeah, but it's kind of a long way.
Things I
Yes.
try to
That
do
was
is
so
teach them
until,
project management and leadership. We have a youth advisory
dedicated
board.
to Rocky.
And that's what we do
That
with them.
was,
We say,
a year
okay, what's
after
the
the light,
project
so
you
it
want
was
to do?
80,
And then we sit down and talk
89.
about how you're going to do
The
it.
current concession
And
stand
what are the
was
steps you
constructed
go through?
And
How
that
do
went
you put a
over
project plan together?
very
What's your
well
budget going to be? And
compared
so
to
you're
what people
incorporating
had
all
to
those
make.
things together. And to me, that's
No,
what
we
we get
have to put
excited
in
about.
roads
Up here,
We enjoy doing.
right now,
We're
right?
not running, we're
Yeah.
the world.
Yeah.
The whole building just.
Yes.
If I understand it right, 21st century
What's that?
learning is all about that. And I also
We're
think
gonna
I
put in
think
an
some of the
accessible
things that
path.
kids did when they were.
So it doesn't necessarily have to be a road, but usually we make it 8 foot wide so you could drive on it too. But yeah, you'd want to take, you probably want to pay. And so, yeah, you want to strategically locate that too, so it doesn't divide up your green space, you know, in a way that makes it not usable.
I don't know if you guys
But,
remember Mr. Moore. You remember Mr. Moore.
Yeah, you do
but
want to get access
he
to
took
the field,
kids,
you
in
know,
fifth
for
grade
both,
and
you know,
he was
students
that
and
teacher. And he would
spectators.
prepare
It would be
them
too
for
much to
a
ask
class trip
if
at the
we
end of the
did
year. They go to the baseball hall of
to the
fame or they go
football
to the
field.
basketball hall of fame.
whether it would
Let's go with that.
continue through the.
But what they did all year long was they
messages.
incorporated reading and
That's
math
on you,
and
that's
science
on the
and
district.
all that
You know,
into,
again,
say,
anything
baseball.
off
So
the
they would
property
read
is
a biography,
automatically
they would write
ineligible
a
for
paper, they would
reimbursement,
write a
but
poem,
I
they
mean,
would do the statistics.
there is a path, right? A footpath?
They
Is
did
it right here, I think?
all these different things
Yeah.
all around
There's a couple of
science,
them.
and then at the,
Yeah, that's
around
what's
these
but
different
there's-
subjects. that
Ray
were
was pointing
Right
out.
there's a spot, is there a little creek too?
The
There's a
best
little,
Maybe just in
parents
spring.
ever had.
on the edge up by
They
the
also
track,
did something
on the
called
south side of the
project
track,
project.
right down there.
Yeah.
There's
They
a
picked
yeah.
something
stream
they
that runs
wanted
down
to
there.
study.
That perennial,
It
it's
wasn't
there
like,
all the time?
okay, you
or
have to do a
just
report
spring?
on this, they
Oh.
got to pick,
Yeah.
it's whatever
So
you
you
wonder
hop
about,
over it or-
you get
Yeah,
to do a
there's a couple
project
bridges.
on it.
Oh, okay.
And they would do research, they write a paper,
Yeah,
they do a
that's
project,
a
they were
bridge
just
right there.
incorporating everything
Over here.
into it. For them, that was
Yeah.
just so much
Yeah.
more fun,
Yes.
Mhm.
and that's.
Yeah, it
what
is good
school's
to
supposed
sort of look
be
at
about,
this,
right? And you-
as
Loving-
a master plan,
loving
since the
learning.
district owns all this property,
Moving away from
to
lecture.
think about it that
Right.
way, again,
Into
so once in a
more
generation
hands-on
time, you
project-based
want to think big
learning
before you
is really
zero in too
what
much.
we
Just
should
in that area between the campuses, before Westchester was constructed, even that, those woods
That was,
were
I
used,
went on
especially
one of the
the
early
Native fellows were
tours
in
of
the school.
school.
Used for
For
good, for good or for?
Yeah, so it was one of the early
Conservation.
school board meetings I had done that summer. But one of the things that I clearly
You see
remember
it,
is
that
the
whole area
science
is
lab
dedicated to a teacher
was
who
used at
single-handedly
science and
A science teacher?
was
taught
responsible
at,
for all that.
Yeah.
Very good.
you know,
Yeah.
and it's
What was up here before?
engaging.
Just residential properties?
And
Farms.
sort
Or the
of
farms,
sort of what you're saying.
where the headquarters are now.
Choose there.
We've owned this property for a long time.
Choose the
What was on this property before the high school was built? Was it farm, one farm, the whole thing?
The whole thing.
Yeah, it's owned by this guy here? This
No,
property?
the house was in,
This house was here?
just a little bit to the right more.
Yeah, near the river, yeah.
have,
Wow.
yeah, they're.
Yeah, we drove by, through some swamp here, but.
Choose anyone.
Yeah. Yeah.
Let's see if I still have it. I do have it.
So, yeah. Exact, that is, it would have to be.
From the silver side. That's why this is raised up a little bit?
Or, you know, or the old,
the old Yeah, we figured that's why this is raised up too. You know, when you come in, you go up the stairs and the ramp, was to get it out of the water. Yeah, water comes out of the side.
You have to remember the tour, there's a science lab, and 2 classes inside with the little stadium seating.
Oh, yeah.
Right out of the hill, right down to the pond.
His teaching style in the room.
They had a whole curriculum.
Right.
I was up there today.
Venture proposed.
Snowshoe.
That's
Snowshoe.
Across this building.
Yeah, I was up there with my class today.
Any salamanders?
Rolling, throwing.
No salamanders.
Those are, those pools out of the springtime.
A lot of deer up there.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, but it is good to think about. I don't know, what other opportunities are there for?
Well, with
sharing
physics,
here?
the beauty of it is there is no MCAS.
We can use this still as a nature study.
There's
Reinforce the
AP
past,
and
maybe.
classes.
The connections.
I'll say that.
I don't know.
Anything.
So I'm thinking pie in the sky, blue sky. I'm just struck by another coach of mine that coaches lacrosse. And he teaches with me in physical education. He went to Grafton High School. I don't know if you guys ever heard of Grafton. Grafton High School, they had a lacrosse playoff game at night. You know, as I go around
And he
and
was
look at different
struck
schools,
about how much the
talking to
community
teachers
used
here,
it at night and the
and we
lights
try to
being
understand,
on the tennis
how they do
courts,
things.
on an outdoor basketball court, on a walking
This school
trail
has
that
some of the
went
most
around, and they had the solar,
forward-looking
the
teachers.
lights and the solar thing, like, you know, as, whatever to do.
Yeah, yeah.
And as the walk went up, and how many people were using it. There's a lacrosse game over here, great. How many people were playing
Like art
tennis,
is an example. I
playing
think it's
basketball,
wonderful.
walking the
Art around
property,
the
and
building.
how open
They
and how
have an art
safe and
classroom
how
that can only
well,
hold
I
7
feel like we're
students.
that kind of a community.
It's not-
I know this, I'm at the school maybe more than anybody, and I say that weekends whenever. There is never a time when someone is not allowed
I think that's one
out.
of the biggest.
Never a time, and you probably can attest to that, just go, there's someone walking, there's someone with their dogs, there's someone throwing a ball, there's someone all the time.
You know, I mean,
Security and safety,
so much.
but yet still want to be in
Are
that.
there any other tennis courts in town?
I think.
Used to be at the CRA, but no,
Yeah.
that's
Two of
it,
them.
no, that's it.
Those are, what, basketball
It
courts?
was
Yeah, two
it
tennis
was
courts.
round graft, it was unbelievable.
There's no tennis team?
No, imagine that.
We put the signs up, no dogs.
Yeah.
You know, it's so good.
Yeah.
There's so many people up there walking.
I agree with
Go to
you.
that Cooper, you go to that school.
Well, I guess if we're talking about the sky,
Maybe you need to do
I
something.
want to make it a magnet. I want to make it a focal point.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just.
For community use, yeah.
Yeah.
Culture of the school.
This is our community, this is it.
That's part of the advertising. Probably the other-
Yeah.
Let's go for auditorium.
Make it more accessible.
Renovate auditorium.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
As far as culture,
But
one
yet
of the
have the
things that
security and the lighting and whatever. Never was.
Parking.
Parking,
That's
yeah,
not-
right.
Parking's not very accessible to the fields right now.
Well, right now for the football games, we get golf carts. Luckily, we get the
Yeah.
country club. We get golf carts for some of the people that just can't walk that far.
Right.
And our athletic director drives back and forth
Yeah.
with those people.
People also park in Nessons
Yeah, they do.
for football.
Yeah.
They come to
On the back here?
Yes.
Yeah.
We lit the path.
Yeah.
We all light the path.
Right, yeah, yeah.
Woods.
Yeah, it's almost equal distance.
So it really
Yeah,
kills
yeah.
me when anyone just talks about this, but you're right, that's what.
Does this land here ever flood?
that is
I've never seen a flood.
parents
No?
that were, that had gone through the school, maybe in that time.
200 feet.
Although there may be
Grabs.
100 foot and a 200 foot that might be different as to what you can do in the first 100 feet.
Yeah.
That's different than
Yeah.
the second 100
That's
feet.
right.
We have over,
Yeah.
The The demolition,
Over 30 different clubs.
is this something that you just repurpose into the grounds there, or is it all new?
I mean, we have a vibrant athletic.
The material, the construction debris.
Right, exactly.
Nowadays, you know, it's sort of factored in the demolition cost. The salvage companies figure out, I get so much steel, I get so much brick, that they can
We have
use,
about 540.
reuse somewhere else, or, you know, or sell to someone who reuses it.
I'm just envisioning the G property when they started tearing down those buildings, they buried them.
Well, they had PCB issues there that they didn't want to leave the site.
Track program is huge.
Hopefully, we don't have that issue here. But yeah, most of the demolition companies figure in some salvage value to some of the stuff that's there.
Yeah.
You know, that you can grind up old
We're also
bricks.
up here a bunch of
You know,
water. I don't know if
exactly,
that was part
to
of
make
it.
new,
But,
new
no,
bituminous
that's the
paint,
thing is that
things like
Isn't
that.
the tag for Takana,
the phrase
maybe
that
that
I
don't
have
to
is
take the building down?
is highly
Owner's tour.
If it's quite that much, it's something like 300,000 worth of abatement and 600,000 to tear the building down. So to get rid of the hazardous stuff. Because what happens is, you know, like foundation, you see that black tar they sometimes put on foundations for waterproofing. If it's got asbestos in it, you know, what do? You could either scrape off all the black stuff, go around the whole building foundation, so you're disposing this much black tar, or you throw away the entire concrete foundation as hazardous material. And you pay for that by the ton. So that's why it adds up to 300,000 or something for the demolition of hazardous materials. It's expensive.
the strongest confidence.
And they still had, yeah, old vinyl tile and a
Well, that
little bit
question will
of
be asked by
insulation.
somebody.
Yeah, what's the cost to demolish? Yeah, sure, we'll figure that in, we'll identify it. The tricky part is, there are some, well, PCBs in particular, hazardous materials that are tricky to test for, because the standards are different than asbestos. With asbestos, we can test, and if it's there, you know, we know what to do with it at the time that the project goes ahead. But if you test for PCBs and find them, you have to take care of them immediately, even if there's no project. And so, you know, people play this kind of risky game and say, well, let's not test then. Let's just make a good educated guess as to how much it's going to cost when it comes time. Because we don't want to be in that predicament of having to deal with it prematurely. And then, you know, I mean, just think of it, if you had to deal with it because the building's going to be another couple of years, and then you're going to tear it down, you're going to invest money for just a couple of years. So it's a funny dance right now because the standards for PCBs aren't up to, you know, other materials yet.
Anything about any blue sky?
So we'll have
that you
cost
don't have to worry
estimate for
about
both
how it
hazardous
gets done,
materials
but
and
boy, we
demolishing
get
the
to do
buildings
this.
in the new construction options.
Don't worry about
They will
that.
identify that,
Just
but again, it's, you know,
think
order of
outside the
magnitude cost, it's not gonna be very specific yet,
Makers
till we do that testing at the last meeting.
It looks like this is sort of pod
Okay.
design.
Yeah, we.
That seems guys are
Appreciate that.
that seems to be the prevailing notion.
An odd question, maybe, Lori will understand why I'm asking it. When you do the construction, like you see all colors in the building, what do you put into it?
Right, is that-
Just district choices or?
You need to join that committee, Kathy.
I know.
Yeah, we
She's
have,
very,
We
very
got
good
the
at
visioning
that.
session. It
we do have interior designers as part of our design team and all. But,
There are lots of places that are gonna be blue.
we try to do things that, make recommendations that do relate both to the school
You can
colors,
handle as a department.
but also
Or
the
you can
natural
handle it
materials
as a
of the
county,
building and maybe
and see,
even the surrounding
You know,
areas,
say,
you know,
okay,
that
this
sort of
is,
thing.
Well, there are also colors that are
working towards
conducive
a local
to
ministry of some sort.
Right, yes, exactly,
food and
exactly. So
Or farm
oftentimes,
conversation.
even
Like,
if
you know,
it's blue and, it's
Yeah,
blue and
you-
white.
or you could do it by grade level. You
Blue
could
and
say,
white
okay,
are
we're
pretty
gonna
easy
nice
to
green
deal with in the
academy,
color
and
scheme,
over here, we're
but
gonna-
sometimes they're not, you know,
Till
it's
12,
orange and
it's
black,
different
things that aren't
organization.
great
They
in
have this
educational areas. So we try to limit the
represented
school
in-
spirit
in-
colors to
in-
areas
in
like,
the
you know, the gym, the athletic areas where it really matters, kids are in uniforms.
It's more flexible.
So it sort of
Not this in Wahconah.
matches.
Yeah.
But it doesn't mean you carry those colors everywhere in the building necessarily.
I'm fine with a periwinkle in the visitor team's locker room, or a pink, something like that, something
Yeah.
good.
Calm down.
Subduing a little bit, I'm fine with all that.
Yeah.
As long as
I went to Taconic High School last week. They did have some colors up. And it wasn't from the top, Taconic, green and gold.
Right.
There was other colors, the hallways, the tiles were white with some mixed in off color like blues.
Yeah, we use those aquatic colors in key areas, like color point. We didn't express it all over the building.
Well, I feel like when you walk into, who's it? Everything's right.
Yeah.
And that's just a lot.
That's often because, the design team might have been a little more passive, and the owner said, our school color is red, we like red. And they said, okay, we'll give you red. They just do it.
My office, I mean.
But usually, the color committee is looking for volunteers.
It's not relevant.
Some people are very reluctant.
I was commenting on the colors as soon as we were in the building.
Yeah.
Warren, Laura, you better get Bonnie on this.
It also affects, I don't know how it affects high schoolers so much, but it does affect kids. It affects their engagement.
We believe design in general, has impact. Colors is a big part of that.
School can be overwhelming.
Why not?
Yeah, there are areas where you want to be stimulated, and other areas where you want, it to be more.
The teachers not getting ahead of it.
We had that problem, put it on our map.
Pie in the sky?
Yes, right, of course. Clear traffic patterns.
Clear traffic
And
patterns.
alcohol. One way to think of it is like a river that, the river's got a flow, but there are eddies, and that's kind of those alcoves. There are areas so the circulation moves like a river, kids through the building, but there are areas right off of it that don't interfere with that.
They have party logos down. It's their 65 alumni.
Good, well, this has been helpful, I think we can come back together and wrap things up. We didn't gain any new members from the meeting down the hall, unfortunately.
I don't think any news.
Getting hit by the sunshine.
I'm
It's really thin. It's amazing. Some people are doing their showers. No rub joints anymore.
Well, the funny thing is, I was thinking the same thing. You know what I mean? So it's, so it's those sorts of things.
Right, there's a lot of glass. There's a lot of light.
We're not breaking down the
We're more aware of activities that are going on the other side of the wall.
I know,
I think the next tour they do for Taconic, you could further on. You should come and because then you'll see,
Yes, I do.
when you walk in,
Yes, I do.
they have the main order.
One thing that I
Yep,
feel
one
is-
day, turn on the left, secretary on the right, and kind of share space. So you have a wall, this, there's up two stories. And it's a white with a tan, almost a little bit lighter than white. But it comes with like this cross patch on it. And you can kind of see different shades. It's phenomenal.
Those wasn't supposed to be. Those are the ones.
Yeah.
Trying to do.
Some cardboard, cut out.
The road's generally pretty good.
It's not a very large statue. Put it over on the wall. So what are you doing?
That's why I didn't tell you that first.
It's a good
You know, and does it. So, yeah. Good. Yeah. Thanks for, I thought he worked on the floor or something. And then came back.
Doing a massage therapy, and I
Okay.
was trying to do something
He's
down
on
there.
there. Brian has a
We're gonna show that
And you're somewhere.
They have a guy coming out outside.
two pages, yeah.
Mike Daniels retired, Mike Cannon.
I know. Okay, we're gonna wrap up.
Contact.
Yeah, the weather's a little.
Business.
Oh, yeah.
You know, what are you doing?
You'll be on vacation.
Gymnastics and teaching. So I think there's find ways.
We just want to wrap up with sharing what each table talked about. So you don't feel like you missed out on anything. So our table was over here. I think the first part of the discussion focused on getting the word out, getting more people engaged in the project, and doing what we can to make it successful. So there were some thoughts about things like that we need to still focus on communicating to the public, even though they weren't here. A lot of them still get information from other ways. I think we talked about the PTO newsletter at some point, and that there seemed to be trust in the building committee and the people representing it, but still engagement is important with the community, we realized. And we need to communicate the need for the project. And one of the needs is education, the fact that education is changing and the facility needs to change with it, so that we address those people who think, the school was good enough for me when I went there, why do we need to do anything, that sort of mentality. So we want to keep the focus on education, which is good. And to realize, that the future is fast changing and unknown, sort of, and that's another reason the building's got to be more flexible and forward looking. Then we also did something a little bit different than other nights, where we because we had the site plan here, we started realizing, we really got to think about this whole piece of property that the district owns and think about it from a master plan point of view. What are the opportunities there? What are the advantages that might offer? Without coming up with real specifics, but we know, for instance, there are paths that connect, and those could be reinforced and utilized. Maybe there's walking trail for community use around the whole property, and certainly there's nature study that's going on now that can be reinforced, and also the notion that we should think of this as a real community amenity, the whole site, and do things to enhance that. Again, partly as a way to build public support, but partly just as a way to take advantage of your resource. And in that regard, a couple of blue sky things, should we put artificial turf on the football field, or should we put lights, everywhere to make this a real, round the clock kind of operation? Do a concession stand with toilets, more accessible to the fields and property. So as I said, think about it as a master plan, the whole property. So I think that's important and can be useful as a criteria in evaluating different options too as we move forward. So I think those were the highlights of our group. Paul?
Thank you, Carl. Our group doesn't feel like we missed anything. We started right off the top talking about green buildings, sustainability, efficiency, and those kinds of factors. Maybe alternative fuels could be investigated as part of this design process. Great. Maybe sustainability could be part of the curriculum even, included as part of the educational process. Idea of strengthening tech ed, the tech ed part of it, and also tying it in with what's happening in the community. And there's something that happens further down here where they're saying, what are the surrounding industries and how can there be a better tie-in between what the schools try to do and the kinds of industries that are here, especially when this may be a way of helping young people to find a way of staying in the area and seeing a future for themselves by tying into that with their educational experience. We talked about maker spaces and got into 21st century education as a topic. We need to educate these students for their future. What was that one statistic about? 60% of the jobs they're going to have don't exist yet. Okay, so that's what's happening right now. So they need to be lifelong learners, and that's what this school needs to be aiming at doing. Not just teaching to the test, so to speak. Making learning relevant and engaging to the students so that they will be, using it right away. And this really ties in well with project-based learning. We had some examples of that, how that has worked at different levels in different places already. It's a trend that seems to be growing. And we're right there. We're ready to go and do this. Maybe internships, maybe hospitality and childcare are areas right now, but there should be others that are developed, others that are even more interesting and more forward-looking that can be used as part of that. We had the principal of the school in our group, and he was talking about the opportunities that they give to the seniors right now along this line, and there's a fairly small group that takes advantage of it at this point. But I think with the changes in education, leaning toward more project-based learning, they'd be ready to do more of that in the future. The idea is the school cannot compete with the vocational schools, but it can include hands-on learning and project-based learning. Page 3. Multidisciplinary learning. We talked about that because that's already going on. It's already happening. This is a faculty that's ready to do these kinds of things, and in some cases, they want to be able to do more than the building is letting them do currently. An important point here is that the Wahconah culture is very unique and important, and needs to be protected so it doesn't get messed up with whatever changes we bring. It really should be built upon and should be nurtured because it's very special. As an example, the senior assembly is spoken of very, very warmly, and that leads to the need for a large auditorium space, okay? Because the senior assembly is such a key part of the culture of the school. They have 30 clubs and activities right now. So it's not just athletics, but all these other things that are going on as well. Sustainability is part of that too. They have a small school culture with big school opportunities, and that's sort of like what they would like to keep going. So we always talk about what do you want to keep, what do you want to keep out of the school, and that's one of those things that's really
Turn that into Latin, it becomes the motto of the
Then this part here is like blue sky thinking. A makerspace in every pod. We talked about pod. Why the diagrams seem to start showing pod clusters in classrooms rather than a double loop corridor. So we talked about that. Schools should have a place to dream, and that led somebody to say they want a pool. Blue sky, we can do that. Net zero building. This is not the first time it's come up, and the finishes should be easy to maintain.
It generates as much energy as
Okay.
it uses.
We can tell your group met a lot of people at the visioning sessions. A lot of things came through in that too.
Yeah.
Great.
I think
Okay.
there should be a child care center and then make that as part of the internship. That's another blue sky thing.
What is it?
Put in a
A child care center in the school.
In the school.
Right.
Yeah, I've seen that at high schools before, yes.
You all probably know about all these ways to stay in touch with the project. Just to keep that up there one more time for folks. And again, thank everyone who's contributing to this. It is useful, especially these days, to get the word out to people, and thank you for filming this and making that available as well. And as we said, we're going to continue to do these kinds of community forums. The content will change, the logistics and format might change a little bit too, but again, we want to have a mixture always of these things where we present information and inform people of where we're at, but then have a good portion of the evening or session be about feedback and or answering questions as we move forward. And the next time we do this will be when we're evaluating these multiple options that we've produced and trying to share with you. We might have narrowed it a little bit. We might have some tendencies as a building committee and design team, but before we finalize and get down to that one choice, we certainly want to meet with the communities again. So thank you very much. We'll wrap this up. I'm sorry.
I have a question on the visioning process. Have we done this with the students?
The students were involved.
There's one right there.
It was great. There you go. Yeah. There's a student. We had, I think, 4 students there. 6 students. It was a good proportion. Often we get 1 or 2, but 6 students, and they were cross-section. They weren't all seniors, I think. Was there a junior?
They were all but seniors.
Okay. Yeah.
And then also to include them in the process as sort of part of the education.
Definitely.
So they're,
Yeah.
they're learning about how these processes work and
Yeah.
working within groups and community things.
We'll do that. Thanks.
There is 2 on the building committee itself.
Yes.
2 students.
2 students on the committee, right? Okay, thanks very much. We appreciate it. Thanks for the setup here and the food and all too. Okay. Thank you.